Wayne had been on the road for hours, the monotonous hum of the engine and the blur of the passing scenery starting to weigh on him. He needed a break, or at least a change of scenery, so he decided to pick up a hitchhiker. It was an impulsive decision, but the loneliness of the road was getting to him. He spotted a figure in the distance, thumb outstretched, silhouetted against the setting sun. As Wayne drew closer, he saw that it was a young woman, her face partially hidden by the shadow of her hood. He slowed down and pulled over, rolling down the passenger window. "Need a ride?" he asked. The woman nodded, a faint smile crossing her lips. "Thanks. I'm headed to the next town over. Is that okay?" "Sure. Hop in," Wayne replied, unlocking the door. As she climbed in, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about her. Maybe it was the way she avoided eye contact or the tension in her shoulders, but he shrugged it off. He was probably just tired. They drove in silence for a while, the only sound the tires on the pavement and the occasional rustle as she shifted in her seat. Wayne tried to make small talk, but her answers were brief and vague. He learned her name was Emily and she had been traveling for a while, but she didn't offer much more. As darkness fell, Wayne's unease grew. He noticed Emily glancing at her phone frequently, her fingers tapping out messages. He couldn't help but wonder who she was texting so urgently. He decided to lighten the mood with some music and reached for the radio. Suddenly, Emily spoke up. "Could you take a detour? There's a place I need to stop by, just for a few minutes." Wayne hesitated. "Where is it?" "Not far. Just off this main road," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying a hint of desperation. Against his better judgment, Wayne agreed. They turned onto a narrow, winding road, the trees closing in around them. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the dense forest on either side. Wayne's grip tightened on the steering wheel as he navigated the unfamiliar terrain. "Just up ahead," Emily said, pointing to a barely visible path leading into the woods. Wayne stopped the car, his heart pounding. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes, I need to meet someone." "It won't take long," she replied, opening the door and stepping out. Wayne watched as she disappeared into the shadows. Minutes passed, and the silence grew oppressive. He checked his phone, but there was no signal. He considered leaving, but something held him back. Then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. But it wasn't Emily. It was a man, tall and imposing, with a grim expression on his face. Wayne's blood ran cold as the man approached the car, his eyes fixed on him. "Get out," the man ordered, his voice low and threatening. Wayne's mind raced. He had no idea what was going on, but he knew he was in danger. He fumbled with the door handle, his hands trembling, and stepped out of the car. "Who are you?" Wayne asked, his voice shaking. "Where's Emily?" The man shot back, ignoring his question. "I don't know. She went into the woods," Wayne stammered. The man's eyes narrowed. "You're coming with me." Without waiting for a response, the man grabbed Wayne's arm and dragged him towards the path. Wayne struggled, but the man's grip was ironclad. As they ventured deeper into the forest, Wayne's fear intensified. The darkness seemed to swallow them, and the sounds of the night grew louder, more menacing. Finally, they'd reached a clearing. In the center stood Emily, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. She was surrounded by a group of people, all watching intently. "What is this?" Wayne demanded, his voice cracking. The man released him and stepped forward. "You've stumbled into something you shouldn't have. Now, you're involved." Emily looked at Wayne, her expression filled with guilt. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." Before Wayne could respond, the group closed in, their intentions unclear but their presence undeniably threatening. He realized too late that picking up Emily had been a grave mistake, and now he was trapped in a situation far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Wayne's heart raced as he tried to process what was happening. The forest, once a place of serene beauty, now felt like a trap, its shadows hiding unknown threats. He looked at Emily, hoping for some explanation, but her eyes were downcast, avoiding his gaze. "Why are you doing this?" Wayne demanded, his voice echoing through the trees. The man who had dragged him into the woods stepped forward again. "You ask too many questions. Just know that you're here for a reason." Wayne's mind raced with possibilities. Was this some kind of cult? A gang? Whatever it was, he needed to find a way out. He glanced around, looking for any possible escape route, but the group had formed a tight circle around him and Emily. One of the group members, a woman with a stern expression, spoke up. "We don't have much time. The longer we stay here, the more danger we're in." The leader nodded. "You're right. Let's get this over with." Before Wayne could react, two of the group members grabbed him, their grips firm and unyielding. Panic surged through him, but he fought to keep calm. "Emily, please, you have to tell me what's going on." Emily finally met his gaze, her eyes filled with tears. "Wayne, I didn't have a choice. They threatened me, said they'd hurt my family if I didn't bring someone." Wayne's blood ran cold. He had been set up, but why? And for what purpose? The leader interrupted his thoughts. "Enough. Emily, you did what you had to do. Now, we need to finish this." Wayne struggled as they dragged him towards a makeshift altar in the center of the clearing. He tried to break free, but it was no use. The group was too strong, their determination unwavering. The leader pulled out a knife, its blade glinting ominously in the moonlight. "This is for the greater good. Sacrifices must be made." Wayne's mind reeled. Sacrifice? What kind of twisted ritual had he been pulled into? Desperation fueled his strength, and he managed to wrench one arm free, swinging wildly at his captors. The element of surprise worked in his favor, and he broke loose, stumbling backward. "Stop him!" the leader shouted, but Wayne was already running, adrenaline propelling him forward. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he had to get away. Branches whipped at his face, and roots threatened to trip him, but he pushed on, the sound of pursuit close behind. He couldn't let them catch him. Not now, not ever. Wayne's breath came in ragged gasps as he burst out of the forest and onto the main road. He didn't stop to look back, didn't stop to think. He ran until he saw headlights approaching, waving frantically for the car to stop. The car screeched to a halt, and the driver, a middle-aged man with a look of concern, rolled down the window. "What happened? Are you okay?" "Help me," Wayne gasped. "They're after me." The driver didn't hesitate. "Get in." Wayne clambered into the car, and the driver sped off, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Who are they? What do they want?" "I don't know," Wayne replied, his voice trembling. "But they're dangerous. We have to get out of here." As they drove away, Wayne's thoughts raced. He had escaped, but the ordeal wasn't over. He had to warn others, had to find out who these people were and why they were so intent on their sinister plans. But for now, all he could do was breathe a sigh of relief. He was safe for the moment, but the memory of the forest and the terror it held would haunt him for a long time to come. Oliver had always been a bit of a free spirit, preferring the unpredictability of the open road to the monotony of everyday life. Hitchhiking had become his chosen mode of travel, a way to meet new people and experience the world from a different perspective. This time, his journey took him along a remote highway cutting through the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced across the pavement. Oliver stuck out his thumb, hopeful that a kind soul would offer him a ride before night fully set in. After what felt like an eternity, the faint hum of an engine grew louder. A sleek, black sedan slowed to a stop beside him, the tinted window rolling down to reveal a middle-aged man with a warm smile. "Need a lift?" the man asked, his voice friendly but carrying an undertone that Oliver couldn't quite place. "Yeah, if you don't mind." Oliver replied, throwing his backpack into the back seat and climbing in. The car smelled of leather and faint cologne, a stark contrast to the musty air outside. "I'm headed towards the next town. Is that okay?" the man inquired, pulling back onto the road. "Perfect, thanks. I'm Oliver, by the way." "Nice to meet you, Oliver. I'm James." The conversation started out light, with James asking about Oliver's travels and sharing a bit about his own life. He mentioned that he was a salesman, often on the road, which explained the pristine condition of his car despite its frequent use. As they drove deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around them, and the sky turned a deep, inky black. Oliver noticed that the car's GPS was off, and James hadn't mentioned where they were headed. "Do you travel this route often?" Oliver asked, trying to mask his growing unease. "Not too often, but I know it well enough," James replied, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "There are some interesting places along the way, if you know where to look." Oliver's curiosity was piqued, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He glanced at the dashboard and noticed that the car was low on fuel. "Hey, you might want to stop for gas soon," Oliver suggested. James nodded. "Yeah, there's a gas station not too far from here. We'll stop there." True to his word, a few miles later they pulled into a small, dimly lit gas station. The place looked almost abandoned, with only one flickering light illuminating the pump. James got out to fill the tank, and Oliver decided to stretch his legs. As he wandered around, Oliver couldn't help but feel like he was being watched. He turned to see James talking to the attendant, their conversation seeming more intense than a casual chat. Oliver strained to hear, but the words were muffled. When James returned, his demeanor had changed. He seemed more tense, glancing frequently at the rearview mirror as they continued their journey. "What did you and the attendant talk about?" Oliver asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh, just asked him about the road conditions ahead," James replied quickly. "Nothing to worry about." But Oliver was worried. The further they drove, the more isolated the road became. The trees pressed in on either side, and the headlights barely penetrated the darkness. Oliver's unease turned to outright fear when James took an unexpected turn onto a narrow gravel path. "Where are we going?" Oliver demanded, his voice trembling. "Shortcut," James said, but his tone was flat and unconvincing. Oliver's mind raced. He had to get out of this car. He watched the trees blur by, looking for any opportunity to escape. The car slowed slightly as they approached a bend, and Oliver seized his chance. He yanked the door handle and threw himself out, rolling onto the rough ground. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the pain, and sprinted into the forest. Behind him, he heard James shout, and the car door slam. Panic drove Oliver deeper into the woods, branches whipping against his face and arms. He didn't stop until he was sure he was far enough away, collapsing against a tree to catch his breath. In the eerie silence of the forest, Oliver realized he had no idea where he was or how to get back to the road. He had escaped one danger, only to find himself in another. The night was far from over, and Oliver knew he had to keep moving if he wanted to survive. Oliver sat with his back against the tree, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His body ached from the tumble and the frantic run through the forest, but his mind was sharper than ever. He strained his ears, listening for any sign of James pursuing him. The forest was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. After a few minutes, Oliver forced himself to stand. He couldn't stay in one place for too long. He needed to find a way back to the road, or at the very least, put more distance between himself and James. As he stumbled through the underbrush, he tried to remember the layout of the land. The road should be to his left if he had kept his bearings straight. The forest seemed to grow denser with every step, the trees looming like silent sentinels. Oliver's heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline from his escape beginning to fade and leaving a gnawing fear in its wake. The moonlight barely penetrated the thick canopy above, casting eerie shadows that danced around him. He walked for what felt like hours, his sense of time distorted by the oppressive darkness. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves set his nerves on edge. He knew James was still out there, searching for him. The man had seemed so ordinary, so unassuming, but Oliver now understood that appearances could be dangerously deceiving. Just as his hope began to wane, Oliver spotted a faint glow through the trees. It wasn't the headlights of a car, but rather the warm, flickering light of a fire. He approached cautiously, hoping to find someone who could help him. As he drew closer, he saw a small clearing with an old, dilapidated cabin in the center. A fire burned in a pit outside, casting long shadows on the cabin's weathered walls. Oliver hesitated at the edge of the clearing, torn between his desperation for help and the fear of stumbling into another dangerous situation. Gathering his courage, he stepped into the clearing. "Hello," he called out softly, his voice trembling. An old man emerged from the cabin, his face lined with age and wisdom. He eyed Oliver with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "What are you doing out here, boy?" the man asked, his voice rough but not unkind. I was hitchhiking, and the driver. He wasn't right," Oliver stammered. "I had to get away." The old man's eyes narrowed. "You're lucky you made it this far. These woods aren't safe at night." Oliver nodded, his fear giving way to exhaustion. "Can you help me?" "I need to get back to the road." The man studied him for a moment before nodding. "You can stay here for the night. It's too dangerous to wander the woods in the dark. In the morning, I'll show you the way back." Relief washed over Oliver, and he followed the old man into the cabin. Inside, the cabin was sparse but cozy, with a few pieces of worn furniture and a small stove. The man introduced himself as Harold and offered Oliver a blanket and a spot by the fire. As Oliver settled down, Harold began to speak. "You're not the first to find trouble on that road. There have been stories about a man who picks up hitchhikers, and they're never seen again." A chill ran down Oliver's spine. "Do you think it was him?" Harold nodded grimly. "Sounds like it. You're lucky to have gotten away." Oliver shivered, the reality of how close he had come to disaster sinking in. He thanked Harold for his kindness, and despite the fear and the pain, he eventually drifted into a fitful sleep. The next morning, Harold guided Oliver back to the road. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the landscape. Oliver felt a renewed sense of hope as they reached the highway. Harold pointed him in the direction of the nearest town and offered a few final words of advice. "Be careful who you trust, Oliver. Not everyone is what they seem." Oliver thanked him and began walking down the road. As he put distance between himself and the forest, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had been given a second chance. He vowed to be more cautious, to never let his guard down again. But even as he walked towards safety, the memory of James' sinister smile and the dark, oppressive forest lingered in his mind. Oliver knew that the road could be a dangerous place, and he would never forget the night he narrowly escaped becoming just another lost soul.